All right, and we are live. Just going to give everybody a few seconds to hop in and join. All right, so I see that there's some attendees joining here. Welcome. All right, so welcome to our session today. So our session for today is called How to Make Finance and Operations Align in Your Purchasing Workflow. And today we're going to talk about best practices for fast-growing biotech and pharma companies. So thank you all for joining today. And some of the event goals, what we're hoping for you to get out of this event. We're hoping to talk about some time-saving tips for purchase order management, how to build an efficient and agile purchasing process through efficient approvals and budget tracking, how to create an easily adaptable ordering and buying process for your lab, how to ensure your orders are being received accurately on time, ways to automate the three-way matching process, and the ROI procurement software and how you can get started. So there's a lot to cover today. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our featured panelists today. So today we have Craig Seaver, the procurement manager at Sanmed, and James Neal, the managing partner at AdaptaLogix. So I'll get you guys to introduce yourselves to the audience.
Hello, everyone. My name is Craig Seaver. As Danny said, I'm the procurement manager at Sanmed Diagnostics. I'm a recent graduate of California State University, Channel Islands, with the dual master's degree in MBA, as well as a master's in biotechnology. I'm flattered to be here. Thank you very much.
And I'm James Neal with AdaptaLogix, the managing partner, CEO of AdaptaLogix. Our company does ERP for pharmaceuticals and biotechs, so accounting and operational management systems, as well as GMP validated manufacturing systems within the pharmaceutical and biotech space.
So glad you two can join us today. And I think we have a really good balance of, someone who's in a biotech pharma company and someone who also works closely with biotech and pharma companies. So we have a really great duel here for the panel. And also wanted to give a shout out also to our biotech team who would be happy to answer any questions about Procurify or what we do. Derek and Alistair, you guys want to say hi?
Hi there, team. Hey, everyone. How you doing?
Yeah, awesome. So we're going to keep on going out here. So Derek, if you don't mind, I'm just giving a quick introduction to what Procurify does.
Sure. Yeah, so hi, everybody. My name's Derek. I'll introduce myself first. I'm an accounting executive here at Procurify, as you saw in that previous slide. And as Danny alluded to, I just kind of wanted to kick us off with a bit of an introduction to Procurify and what it is that we do. So I speak to finance and operations professionals every day about the problems that they have, specifically with their purchasing processes. And I've kind of just listed a quick summary on our next slide here. So as the theme of this webinar is to how to align our finance and operations teams with your procurement workflow, I thought I'd take a second to talk through some of the problems that we see with finance and operations teams, specifically in the biotech and pharma world. So there are some overlapping challenges and there are some things that are unique, and it's just important that our processes do accommodate both. So starting with the financial side, a lot of the current processes that we see aren't audit compliant. There's a lack of internal controls when it comes to your spending. Rogue spending or overspending is uncontrolled and oftentimes just unmeasurable and not really known kind of what it is that you're overspending on. There's a lack of financial visibility from a reporting standpoint as well. And those can often be captured by having just a better procurement process, and oftentimes procurement software can help with that. Now, on the operations side of things, they're not unique from finance, but there are some that are a little bit different. So oftentimes finance teams care that their processes just aren't efficient and there's time being wasted, and they can improve those. Oftentimes there is a complete lack of budget visibility. It's often tracked manually somewhere on Excel or some kind of unique budgeting tool that you may use. And then obviously the other pieces of like just systems integrations and then usability. So oftentimes we see finance teams have difficulties where their accounting systems aren't linked with their procurement systems, whether that be an email or kind of Excel-based format. And if they do have a system, oftentimes it's not the most easy thing to use. So at Procurify, we've kind of looking at all of these problems that we see, and we've come up with what we feel is like a decent solution. So if you can go to the next slide, Danny. Perfect. So the way that we've looked at this is there's sort of two ways to capture these things. So there's the old way, think like triplicate paper, paper to have pen approvals from your managers. Obviously, this system is extremely manual. It's slow. It requires a ton of manual entry into those accounting systems. Now we've talked about this kind of new way where it's to kind of just get it done and worry about it later attitude. So oftentimes organizations will have like rogue spending that happens because of this lack of audit compliance, no financial controls, lack of visibility. And it's just kind of like that credit card purchase, get it done. So on that next slide, I'm just kind of giving a quick overview of what Procurify looks like from a workflow standpoint. And our solutions helped over 450 clients around the world process $8 billion in spend. So providing that centralized platform to run all of your spending, purchasing data through, and streamline workflows to help with both the financial and operations side of the business. So at the end of the presentation, as Danny said, we will have some contact information for myself and Alistair if you're interested in learning more about our solution. But yeah, let's get started on the webinar here.
Thank you so much, Derek, and such a great explanation. We're going to talk through a little bit more of these issues as well from Craig and James as well. All right, so the very first question of the day, and we're starting pretty big according to the headline of the event. So what are some of the biggest challenges that biotech and pharma companies face when it comes to buying and procurement? And I'll pass it off to you, Craig, to get us started.
Thank you very much. So, our company in particular, being a small R&D lab, we purchase all sorts of different things from every vendor under the sun. And what this really causes for someone in my shoes is it's organizationally a mess to keep everything straight lined and doing triplicate matching and being able to have all these wonderful features manually. There's just so much going on, from emails, from trying to keep on top of inventory, to just making sure that all of the scientists are on the same page about where the projects are headed and where in the budget are we. That in terms of procurement, you really have to stay on top of it if you don't have a system to help you out with it. So really, I think the biggest challenge is just trying to keep everything organized.
Yeah, and that's actually what we see out of our customers as well. The vast majority of them, they'll have their R&D team, they'll have people outside of the accounting department that are placing orders. It's really twofold. The actual placing of the orders is a process that is difficult to handle manually, and then from a standpoint of reporting back that the finance, how much do we actually have out on the street? How much is does the company owe? Because they've already committed to the purchase orders or contracts. That is something we see across the client base. And what we find is that kind of emailing and manual PO processes from a standpoint of some of the biggest challenges are where are they in the process? Have they been approved? Once they've been approved, have they been received? Should they be paid? All of these things just exponentially just cause pain across the organization, especially as you start to grow, get more people ordering and across more departments.
Yeah, definitely. These are such great points. And I think we're going to see a lot of these from the audience as well. Keeping a hand on purchasing, as you guys mentioned, the purchase order management part, just a quick summary of what you guys talked about here. And for the people here in the audience, don't worry about, taking notes or anything. We will be sending you the slide deck with all the notes. Don't worry about that. So we're going to launch our very first polling question today, which is, what are some of your greatest challenges when it comes to your procurement processes? So you should be able to see the poll here. And we will not be sharing your answers, so don't worry about giving away any trade secrets or anything like that. Okay, so we're just at 50% voted. Perfect. Thank you so much. All right. So how can pharma and biotech companies create better finance and operational alignment in organizations now that we talked a little bit more about the challenges? How can they be supportive of each other as departments?
Yeah, so one of the things that I see is there's a lot of tension between the finance and the operational side, because they just want to get the stuff in, right? R&D teams, they need that kind of frictionless. I just want to order. I just need to buy this. This isn't my job, right? I just need to get this in. My job is actually doing the R&D. How they find better alignment is really making that process as frictionless as possible. And really, like, for instance, if you take an R&D team, which I think, Craig will talk a little bit about, and they order tons of little stuff that, no one can spend a lot of time on each individual little thing. And then you might have other departments that order big things. So making it where the finance team can see what's happening without getting in the way of it happening, I think is one of the best ways that they can, find alignment in really making sure that it all flows seamlessly and as frictionless as possible.
Yeah, James, you definitely hit the nail on the head there. I think in addition to that is we find in a lot of these organizations that these departments are really segregated and siloed apart from each other, and there's not nearly enough communication in between the two departments to make sure that everyone is aligned and on the same page. A big part of that is just the language that needs to be passed back and forth. And oftentimes we see a big wall being thrown up between the two departments because they can't talk in the same language. So either having a liaison, having a piece of software that can help translate all of this into just easy to read graphs and spreadsheets is really, really, very valuable to trying to align these organizations. So this way we can find out, is this invoice correct before it gets off to the AP department? We can have the finance department say, hey, we need to talk about budget without stopping all of the R&D department's spending for a week and a half or something silly like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It looks like what you guys have mentioned, it really is a lot about communication, improving that. Avoiding silos and just having visibility to what's happening so that, both departments can talk about the same issues and work on that together, which is really great. So just summarized some of the points here for the audience. And in regards to that, what are some horror stories that you've seen surrounding managing lab purchases in financial operations? Craig smiling there.
Yeah, I have plenty of small horror stories from just having no communication in any part of the process. A small one was when we were building out this lab, we didn't have communication between the engineering crew, the finance department, and the person who actually designed the lab. And we almost ended up with a water fountain in the lab. Or alternatively, when I first started, we were missing like 2 months of receipts because everything was done manually, and had to go to all the individual stores with the credit card, try to say, hey, I purchased something from you X amount of weeks ago. Can you try and look up the receipt in the system and print it out for me? Just a mess. And there's so many easier ways to deal with all of this that, Procurify absolutely takes care of. You can just take a photo of the receipt as soon as you get it, and boom, you're done. Makes it very easy. What about you, James? Do you have any horror stories for us?
Yeah. I mean, I've seen quite a few horror stories across the the span of our customers. I won't speak to any one particular one, but one of the things that we deal with quite a bit is GMP and expired materials and So you end up with quite a bit of potential issues around what material is being what material is being ordered, when it's being received, how it's being received, and how it's being paid for. In a completely manual system, we've seen where they're relying on particular records to be like materials on site for a particular manufacturing process. I can't tell you how many times I've heard about having to effectively overnight or expedite materials to make sure our manufacturing process keeps going. Because there was just no system to track, hey, we don't have these particular things here to do that. And then other just plain old everyday things of, the CEO getting an invoice, for $150,000 that no one ever knew was even a thing. That is something that you can only do once or twice before you have someone calling for your head. There are horror stories all over the place of companies in the biotech and pharma industry that have grown to a point where all of a sudden these things start to crop up more and more and more, that really they kind of say, hey, listen, we need a better way to communicate this information.
Wow, that's wild. I wonder how that $150K invoice slipped through the door there.
It doesn't take much to have like a piece of equipment that was ordered that no one knew, no one knew about. And then all of a sudden, you're on the hook for it. Someone signed for it. No one knew that they signed for it, or at least no one in finance. Of course, the R&D team knew it, but that's not the people that are cutting the check. So.
Yeah, definitely. That is wild. And just a quick share here. One of our most popular pieces of, I guess, marketing material, it's who the F approved this. I don't know if you can see. That kind of speaks to this pinpoint here.
Yeah.
So moving on to the second polling question. So knowing that, there's so many challenges within biotech and pharma organizations and where your organization's at, how do employees at your organization currently make spending decisions? Okay, and you should see the poll here in a quick second. Once again, this is going to be anonymous, so we're not going to be sharing your responses. And this one is also a multiple choice. So if you're using like a multitude of ways to manage spending, feel free to choose that as well. Awesome. Thank you so much for voting. We're going to end the poll here. Okay. So moving on here. So when should companies start exploring purchasing automation? So we talked a lot about, seeing that there's a lot of, mishaps when it comes to managing company purchases. And with the increasing volume of purchase orders, sometimes it really gets hard to, get it down and clamping it down. And we talked a lot about communication as well. And James, you mentioned having a solution where people can communicate with each other is super important. But when should companies start looking at this? And what are some of the signs that they might need a solution moving forward?
I think that for a lot of biotech companies, even ones that are starting out mid-sized or even large-sized, that purchasing automation, having the automated three-way invoice matching, having automated approval workflow, this should be a core processy. I think from the start, a lot of companies should really give purchasing automation a solid play in their business, because going through it manually, even if it works for some time, if you have plans to grow your business, eventually you'll hit a point where you're either going to have one person who's doing all the purchasing or a group of people doing the purchasing, and it's going to fall apart, or you're going to need a lot more people than it would typically require. So, what are some signs that they're starting to look for a solution like this? Is your purchasing department getting overwhelmed with what seems to be routine operations as you're expanding? Are you starting to have breakdowns, really big breakdowns in communication between finance and operations? Are you having breakdown in communication anywhere else? And if your organization is having a hard time just keeping track of their POs, keeping track of your spending, it's high time to look for an automation solution, because all of these things become so much easier to deal with. Generating that year-end report, instead of taking maybe 15, 20 hours for somebody to manually compile it, it's just a click of a button now. And it makes it so much easier and so much faster. So as soon as it starts becoming a pain, that's the moment you should start looking for automation.
Yeah, I mean, I can echo that. I think, most of the clients that we've seen that come to us, they are either past the time where they need something, or they're coming to us because they need something. And in that case, we generally, bring them to something like a Procurify. Where I think people get hung up on is well, we're small, we're a small R&D team. If you're a group of like 4 people, in your phase 1, then yeah, it's probably not, you're probably you're sitting in the same room with the 4 people anyhow. Not that big of a deal. As soon as you get to a point, like Craig's saying, where now you've got an accountant that needs to track, when the bills are going out, and this is the one that's actually going to cut the checks. And you've got an R&D team that is, placing orders. And now we've got, maybe a CMC team that's placing orders, or what have you. It's basically as soon as you can get it in, because it's going to save you time and effort. Systems are fairly easy to set up. It's not an ERP, which is a fairly structured and more difficult system to set up, as I well know. It's a system that is relatively easy to stand up. So the threshold's much lower. So my adage is usually, as soon as possible, but as late as practical, right? You don't want to get it after the point of, where you need it, because now you're already feeling the pain. But you don't want to get it when it's kind of killing a fly with a sledgehammer. I usually find if you're talking about adding an FTE just to control the PO process, well, there's the trigger, right? If that ever comes up in conversation, there's a good idea that you actually need a system which is better than the FTE in a lot of cases. And you probably still have to add the FTE eventually, to do the procurement contracts, right? But they shouldn't be handling stuff that can be automated. So.
I think you got a really good point there, James, especially when you said, does this add another FTE? I think from a Procurify standpoint, we tend to see a lot of customers talk about this as well, where they think, oh, well, the way to solve our issue is just to hire somebody else to deal with the number of purchase orders, number of purchase orders. But really, it's like, you're not really getting rid of the paper. You're just putting more bodies into the work, right?
Well, and the big point there is, when you add a person, that person's not going to be available at 11:30 at night or midnight when you're talking to your Chinese, counterpart to find out where that PO is, or has that vendor bill been paid. So a person can only go so far. If you have effective systems, effective communication systems, you should be able, that person that's doing the purchasing should be able to answer that question at any hour, any time. And without having, let's say, 24/7 procurement person, on the other end of the phone.
All right. And talking about, choosing a purchasing automation solution, what are some other evaluation criteria should a company look at? So we talked a little bit about the signs that you might need a solution and the red flags. So how do people start choosing?
So I think that this is a twofold answer. The first is, does the software fit the current processee, or do you want to change the processee to fit the software? And a big part of that, which is the second fold, is what are some of the new features that the software is going to give us, and do we have a use for it? For example, you may want to go on and automate everything, but you don't have the requirement for some reason to do like three-way invoice tracking. You wouldn't want to go find a system that's really heavy on that, for example. But the biggest for us as we are implementing an automation solution right now is trying to find something that fits our required processee. And that is ending up being probably more difficult than just changing our processee to work with a software. But this is where our hands are tied, unfortunately. But it's really just trying to figure out what are our requirements, what are the benefits that we're getting out of this solution as well.
Yeah, and I would say, I think that all goes around, knowing the goal of what you're trying to get out of the system. One of the things we find when we talk to our clients is like who's going to be using the system. If it's mainly meant to be an R&D, then you don't want it to be a difficult system to use. It needs to be very intuitive because they're only going to be in there every so often, right? They need to be able to log in and understand exactly what they're looking at with very little to no training. Also, do you need sourcing? Do you need punch outs? Do you need, any of that type of stuff? Also understanding, hey, what's my current financial system, and can I connect to that? So having a list of those kind of 4 or 5 different points will help you identify what the right solution is. But the main thing, of course, is knowing who the user base is. Generally, with these systems, if you're enabling or you're empowering your purchasing group, or not purchasing group, but the people who are doing the purchasing outside of the department, in the business, you want to look for something where they can log in and use it as easy as they would use like an Amazon shopping cart. No training, very easy and intuitive. That's probably my primary thing I tell my clients to look at.
Yeah, these are some really good points here, as you guys mentioned. Craig, I think you got a really good point there, like finding that balance between changing processes to fit the software and vice versa. I feel like that's always a challenge in a lot of organizations, even ours. We're like, well, should we change our processes, or should we get the people from the software company to kind of recommend something for us? And then we talked about knowing the goals and users of the solutions and understanding the ecosystem and integrations, which we'll also talk about a little bit later, because I know the integration part might be a challenge for a lot of growing organizations when you guys scale. So, and here's the question that I hinted towards. What do you have to watch out for from an integration standpoint? And when should companies look for a dedicated procurement solution versus maybe using the procurement module in their ERP? Because, with Oracle, they have like a procurement module there. So why should someone choose that versus something else? James, I know this is your specialty.
Yeah. And that is, that's a question we always get. NetSuite, which is what we implement, it does have a procurement module. It's got a PO system, even handles some contracts. Where we find that we, steer people outside of that system, and it happens often, is for certain types of purchases. So, as an example, I'll give you just a very, very common use case. You'll have a client that'll actually have R&D and QC that use a Procurify type system to do their purchasing for things that are generally not inventory, right? They're consumables, they're things that'll be not even stored as inventory numbers in the system. So if you think about a lot of R&D materials, you're not looking at those to be created in your ERP system, or else you'd have this incredibly long list of things that you're only going to use once, right? Or maybe very infrequently. So that's a perfect example of where Procurify would be a perfect solution. Now, on the GMP manufacturing side, when you're dealing with demand generation and you're essentially having the system place purchase orders for you, you use the procurement system within NetSuite to do that, because the system's actually creating the POs. It's not a thing where there's anybody that has to interact with it. And then for all intents and purposes, the system's doing all of the work there. Now, do we have some clients that use POs and they push, POs within NetSuite and push those out to departments? Yes. But again, that's knowing your user base. If it's, if you're going to have 20 or 30 different R&D, purchasers in there, asking them to type in the part number, the vendor's part number on every purchase order that they enter, and filling in the description every single time they enter, order something, you're going to, they're going to be coming at you with pitchforks. So there's again, knowing your user base and understanding that. Now, from an integration standpoint, understanding where it integrates. So a lot of systems will only integrate at the vendor bill level. We know 3, 4, 5 different procurement systems out there. Most of them, I'll give you an example of a halfway decent one that is like Concur, right? Everybody knows Concur. They do vendor bills. They do not do good at purchasing. They don't do what a Procurify would do. People will come to us all the time and say, well, can we just use Concur? Well, you could for the very early stuff, but then as soon as you start doing anything where you need to actually bring materials in for a supplier, you want to start storing item numbers of that supplier items, now you're completely out of the gate. Also, the purchase order doesn't end up in NetSuite. So now the finance department never even knows that it's being purchased. That's also the failing of a lot of other procurement systems, is that purchase order doesn't end up in NetSuite. So your finance system, your finance people never know that it exists until it actually gets there as a vendor bill. So Procurify actually hits that PO and the vendor bill. So that's one of the things I like about it, because it actually gives that finance team the ability to see the PO before it becomes a vendor bill. So a couple things I would look at from integration. First off, when a company says they've done an integration, make sure they've done it. They can actually show you companies that they've done that with, and they can give you a rock solid price on what that integration is going to be, and they tell you exactly what's needed for that integration. If any of those are questionable, if they say, well, we're not sure, no, I got to find someone that will tell me that, whatever, then they probably haven't done it before. They've done it very few times. A lot of that vaporware out there. The second thing is to know what the integration points are. If you create a vendor in, like in our example, if we create a vendor in NetSuite, does it create in Procurify? Well, the answer is yes. And vice versa. If you have a system that doesn't do that, then you're going to have a one-way transaction, and it's going to make it very difficult to keep those things in sync. So, there's a lot of those things that I always tell my customers to, we'll sit in a lot of times and say, here's the questions that we ask, and they're very simple questions, but if they can't be answered, or if the answer is no, then you should walk away from that product, because it's not going to give you what you need.
Yeah, those are some amazing insights there, James. And no wonder this is what AdaptaLogix specializes in.
Yeah, Craig? Yeah, seen more than a few. Yeah.
Yeah. And for those who are interested in learning more about AdaptaLogix, I'll make sure to include James's contact information as well if you guys have any other follow-up questions. Okay, and Craig, do you have anything to add to this as well when it comes to integrations and whatnot?
I think James really nailed it there. The biggest part is getting not everything integrated into the solution. And the vendor bills is a huge one, where you've got people who sometimes go through and make a purchase without really running it by procurement, without really running it by finance, and then boom, an invoice shows up. Or just a lot of things that you may have on auto pay, the electricity, the gas, just maybe the rent for your building, that you would think at the end of the year you go, make sure to calculate rent into everything, but it would just be a lot easier if the system automatically had that integrated into it somehow. And just missing those can cause huge discrepancies from what your software is reading out and what your accountant is sitting there saying, well, you didn't actually did you actually spend that much money? Because if you look back at everything we've paid out, it's X amount of dollars more. And just having inconsistencies in the system can just really throw you for a loop, because now it turns into you got to become a detective and figure out what is going on here. And it can take hours of one person's time to just solve the PO never got put in the system. I found it. It took me a few hours, but I found it. And that has to be the biggest thing to watch out for, is having a good, solid integration.
Yeah, these are some really, really good insights here. I wasn't able to summarize everything. I tried to, touch up on it, but if you guys have any other questions, feel free to reach out as well. But some of the considerations here, integration points, as James and Craig mentioned, think about best of breed versus all in one. Do you want a solution that does exactly the job it claims to be, or a little bit of everything? And, the usability of that. I feel like we don't talk about that enough when it comes to software, because we get caught up in the bells and whistles, but will your team actually use it, right? Because that's how you're going to get your ROI from it. That's how you're going to get the stickiness from the software. And lastly, the cost part, which I do want to get into a little bit more, where there's a lot of hidden costs as well. The cost of the solution, cost of the users, implementation costs for a lot of other bigger solutions. So a lot of things to consider there. And just a follow-up question for you, James. How does someone justify the ROI? What are some KPIs that people can look at?
Yeah, it's really it's one of those things where it's really in how many people have to be added versus not, right? So there's really two things. First off, I always love the KPI question, because the companies within biotech and pharma grow so quick that you don't know if you would have added that person or not. Does that make sense? It's not like, you're going to get rid of somebody, but you may not add a headcount or two. So really the ROI is in additional people. Also, there's a hidden thing, and this is where you were going to with the usability, is how much time does it take away from the departmental people that have to do this work, right? One of the things we find that is if, we deploy something that is not, like I said, if you're using this an ERP procurement system, if they've got to type in the part number every single time, the description every time, and, it's just a kind of a hassle to enter the thing. Not only will you get fight back on that, but that's taking extra time out of the people's schedule to do that work, right? So, long story short, it's really difficult to calculate ROI, but when you've got the system right, it is the easiest way I can say it.
That's a really good mic drop. You will know it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you will know it when you get it wrong.
Yeah.
Very quickly. Yep.
For sure. Thank you, James. And the last question of the day today, thank you all for participating in the poll question so far. So are you currently in the market for a procurement automation solution? Or maybe you're looking to switch for something a little bit more suitable to where your organization's at? Give you guys a few seconds there. And again, this is anonymous. So if you vote for this, no one's gonna try to hunt you down or anything, unless you're saying, yes, I'm looking for something, then yes, we will reach out and see how we can help you. Okay, give you guys a few more seconds here. Okay, so we are at 42%. So it looks like some people haven't voted yet here. Get your votes in. Give you 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, let's close it off here. Thank you, everybody. All right. And this is the last question that we have for you guys today before we move into audience Q&A. So in general, what advice do you two have for pharma leaders who want to create a more proactive procurement process for their team?
We've been dancing around the topic the whole day, this whole webinar, and it has to be more communication between the departments. In my company, in the last company I was at, I feel like in every company I was at, this is the crux of so many issues, is just the lack of communication between departments. And with that lack of communication, there is no expectations known from either side. And so a lot of assumptions are made, and that always goes bad. So being able to communicate at all levels throughout the business, operations to finance, R&D to finance, and to everyone else that they need to talk to, just so that we can make sure everyone's staying aligned. As a business, this is, I think, the key focus, is to make sure that all the different parts are working harmoniously to meet our final goal. And when you don't have communication, things are going to fall apart, whether it's in the procurement process where you need to have communication to accurately do this job, whether it's in the financing department when you need to generate all the reports at the end of the year. Having that lack of communication, having a lack of expectations just can cause so many problems and be a huge pain point. So I think that's really the biggest advice, and having, whether you have to hire in an individual to be that liaison person between the groups, whether you rewrite your communication processes in the company, it has to be highlighted and taken care of.
Yeah, and I would say, think about your users. So definitely communication, just on Craig's talked about communication and setting expectations is huge, and also understanding there's change management that goes along with these things, making sure that everybody understand, maybe there's a phase 1, phase 2, right? Maybe phase 1 is you get a procurement system, and phase 2 is you get the FP&A system in that can do budgeting. Phase 3 is you hook that all into an ERP, whatever. But setting that expectation up front as to what you get when and what's the immediate solution versus the future solution. But the second thing is I think with technology the way it is today and where things are today, enabling people or empowering them to answer their own questions is huge. We see a lot of satisfaction with our customers when they are able to get on at midnight, because with the world we live in, especially within the pharma and biotech industries, dealing with European counterparts in our own company, or dealing with generally Asia Pacific companies if we're dealing with testing labs or API suppliers, whoever it might be, you have to be able to answer the question at midnight as well as you can at noon. I think looking at that, looking at the system and making sure that, hey, if I get this right, then my normal processes will go without a hitch, and I'm only dealing with exceptions. And then making sure that, the people who are in the system can see everything they need without asking a human. Those two things are the biggest thing that I would ask, if I were in their position of one of these types of systems.
Yeah, James, I think that is huge, especially since a lot of people have to respond to this remote environment last year, right, during the pandemic. And now they're having to be able to think about, are we able to get this information on the dot? Are we able to actually access this without going to the office? And I think we're seeing a lot of the shift continue on this year as well. So I think people will have access to that. That's going to be really great.
Yep. Yeah, the days of the old, red folders that would move from mailbox to mailbox should be dead at this point, with all the PO sign-offs and everything.
You'd be surprised that we heard from some clients that even during the pandemic, there was an office manager that went in, once every week just to check the invoices. And I was mind blown by it all.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. So some of the Feedback here is to communicate and set expectations, as we mentioned, planning for risk and having a game plan ready, even though we could never predict some of these black swan events. Be ready to have access to data and visibility to spend on your fingertips, like what James mentioned, building a process that gives you the context behind what has happened, and using automation to eliminate menial tasks and focus on more value-added activities. I think this is what we talked about when it comes to proactive procurement. Awesome. So before we go to the audience Q&A, I just wanted to highlight a few post-event goodies that we'll be sending your way as well. So first off, we're going to be sending you the slide deck along with Craig and James's contact information if you have any other questions for the wonderful panelists. And also, we're going to be sending you a case study that kind of talks a little bit more about a personal story of a high-growth biotech startup, how they were able to purchase their lab needs, but also clear the vendor invoices in no time. So I'm sure a lot of you guys can probably relate to their story. They were growing really quickly. The volume of purchase orders was really increasing, but they weren't able to actually figure out like a easy way to manage the purchases. So we'll send that over your way. And then another one is more of a general guide for spend management for proactive finance leaders. This one is actually very action-packed. I don't expect you guys to read it all at once. It's like 20 pages or something, but it's a nice little like tabletop. If you want to go through it, it's a nice little manual. And two other things is we'll be inviting you to our other events as well to see if there's other things that you want to learn. Of course, there's no obligations. This is just something that we would like to offer. So thank you all for joining today. So now we're going to open it up to the audience in case you have any questions. So if you want to ask our guests any questions, you can either type it in the chat box on the below button here, if you can see that on your Zoom menu, or you can submit it in the Q&A box there and they'll be able to see it all. Or if you have an anonymous question, you can also directly DM me. So when you click on the chat box, you can actually click on Danny Howe and then you can send it over my way. So I'll give you guys a few seconds there in case you have any questions. Okay, no questions so far. Derek and Alistair, do you guys have any questions for Craig and James?
I don't think so. Just want to say thank you for everyone attending today, and thank you to all our panelists. It's been awesome.
Yeah, thanks, guys. This was great.
Yeah, it looks like we don't have any questions so far. But if anyone, thinks of a question, or if they think that there's something that we missed during this presentation, feel free to reach out. So as I end the event for today, I'm also going to be sending you guys a post-event survey as well. So feel free to send that over to us so we can know what to improve for next time. And I don't think anyone's ever going to complain about the event ending early. So we can always do that as well.
Thank you for having me on as a panelist. This was absolutely lovely getting to meet and work with you all. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
same here, Craig. Thank you so much, James and Craig. So I guess I will be ending the event now and hope to see you guys on a future event. Bye
Thanks,
now.
all.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.